Theology or debating religion was an indoor sport at the time. I mean, that was the whole point of rabbis. They would argue like mad about what a text meant. But when it became political and later on when people got power, it became much more than that. But right now we're getting to see the earliest part, according to the book of Acts, that the church is being born here in persecution. Okay. Now, in chapter 9, where we have the Damascus Road story, Saul is trying to extend the persecution to Syria. And so he asks for letters to bring to the leaders of the synagogues in Syria so that he can find people who belong to, quote unquote, the way. At that point, this is what the people who believe that Jesus was the Messiah were referred to. No Christians. The word Christian is only occurs twice in the New Testament. Jesus never used the word or heard the word. And Jesus, of course, according to the Gospels, was not interested in making a church. He was interested in vindicating Israel and telling Israel that the Messianic age was here and that the kingdom of God was here. And you get that in the two nativity stories. You know, he will rule over the throne of David forever and that sort of thing. And then later on in the crucifixion scenes, you say you are the king of the Jews, or the inscription. And famously in the Gospel of John, say that he claimed to be the ruler of the Jews, and Pilate said, what I've written, I have written, and I'm going to put it like that. So Jesus didn't have the idea of the church, but very, very early on, it became clear that there was going to be a schism in the synagogue, even though, and I'll talk about this later, only 2 Jewish groups survived the destruction of the temple in 70 of the Common Era. So Saul gets letters, goes to the synagogues. He's on the way because he's looking for anyone that he finds that belongs to the way. He's going to bring them back to Jerusalem for prosecution. Now, again, we have to use our historical hats. This is still Roman-occupied territory. There were very, very strong limits as to what you could do without Roman sanction. And the Romans would not allow a sort of rump government do things that only Rome could do. But right now, let's just say, let's just take it at its face value, that Saul is trying to do what he can to go to Syria, and that shows also by chapter 9 that the word is spreading. In the book of Acts, we have the idea that 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 are added, so the church is growing. Okay, now, when Acts was written?
No, when presumably Saul was.
Well, let's see, it would be around somewhere between 50 and 55 of the Common Era. So it's 30 years after the events of the Jesus was around, yeah. Now, here's the experience. Saul's on the way to Damascus. There's a reason why we call this the Damascus Road experience, right? A light, phos, flashed from the sky. Very often, light or fire indicates divine presence. We saw it in the version of Pentecost, flames of fire coming, or we have it in the burning bush. Or we even have it in when Elijah goes into the fiery chariot into the sky. And I think that's how I'm going to go out. That seems such a jazzier way to go than just falling out, just going. So I'll have a few friends around and we'll just wait for the chariot. Anyway, the light flashes, and the author knows that we're saying, wow, this isn't just a sort of a phenomenon. This means that God is around. Saul appropriately fell to the ground, because if you are in the presence of this remarkable thing and you intuit that's God, you're either going to take your shoes off or you're going to fall to the ground. And as he falls to the ground, he hears a voice addressing him, Saul, Saul. And we've found this in other encounters. In the Samuel story, for example, Samuel, Samuel. And again, this is a very, very typical sort of call narrative. And the voice wants to know, why do you persecute me? Which means the voice is not God's, but it's Jesus's. And Saul wants to know, who are you speaking? And Jesus identifies him, I am Jesus, whom you are. So point out here that Jesus says, in persecuting the people of the way, you're persecuting me. So Jesus takes this very personally, so to speak. And then Jesus doesn't allow for any dialogue, but he just gives Saul, he'll become Paul a few chapters later. Jesus instructs Saul to get up and enter the city and wait for further orders, and simply presumes that Saul will listen. This is kind of interesting because Saul is completely compliant. I mean, he's hell-bent. I mean, the way it starts, he's still breathing threats. He's still upset. He's going hell-bent for leather, and the next thing you know, here's a voice and not one word in protest. And we saw in the burning bush thing, Moses has one excuses after another. I can't speak well. They won't believe me. Who shall I say has sent me? All of that. But Saul doesn't do that. He's immediately compliant. Now, maybe when you've sort of been knocked off your donkey because of this light, maybe that would make you a little bit more susceptible to orders, especially if it's a voice like that. Of course, the people who were traveling with Saul, they also heard the voice, but quote unquote, saw no one. So they hear this, they don't respond at all. There's no discussion between Saul and his fellow travelers. But he got up. Turns out, after he fell, even though his eyes were open, he could not see. So he was blinded. Now, these are, again, typical aspects of the Saul narrative. The ability to see or hear, we think of them always as senses, at which they are. But they always have a double meaning in call narratives. Because there's one thing you can see and not see. You can hear and not hear. And one of the things I love about Hebrew is that the word for hear and the word for obey are the same word. And we know that as parents, because we say, didn't you hear me? And of course you know that you've been heard. That means you didn't obey me. And I just love that semantic range. In any case, they, presumably his companions, lead him into the city, and he remained for 3 days at some undisclosed place, actually at the house of a man by the name of Judas. We'll come back to that. And he remained there blind for 3 days, during which time he neither ate nor drank. So this is a traumatic experience. If you have that kind of experience, you can get by for a day or so. But 3 days, no food, no water. This is a man in some trouble here. Then the scene shifts, because Jesus is not done here, and he comes in another form, in a vision, to a man by the name of Ananias. And now Ananias is described as a mathetes, a disciple. Probably at this point, a disciple should not be considered as one of the 12. Those would be apostles. So that distinction is being made. And the Lord spoke to him in a vision, and Ananias responded, "Here I am." Again, in a call narrative, that's the appropriate response. Think of the famous one with Isaiah, "Here am I, send me." Okay. But the Lord tells Ananias to go to Judas' house where Saul was staying. Now, this is not the Judas the betrayer. And my guessing that very, very shortly afterwards, you're not naming anybody Judas after a while because of the notoriety that he had. An interesting story about that. When I went to seminary, I went to a place, Asbury Theological Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky. Wilmore is about 15 miles away from the University of Kentucky, which is in Lexington. And that was my first exposure to college basketball. Kentucky had these great teams, and at that time, the famous coach was Adolph Rupp. And it occurred to me, they named him Adolf before the notorious German, because no one is named Adolf anymore. Even in Germany, for pity's sakes, that name is out for generations. So Judas, very common name, but in Christian circles, no longer. So this is a different Judas. And he says, "I want you to go to Judas' house where Saul was staying." He says, "At this time, Saul was praying." Now, we learn later that Saul was a very religious man. He was a Pharisee. And that also meant that he was well educated. And of course, later on, we realize, and we find this in Acts, that Saul was actually a Roman citizen. So he was upper class. He was part of the hoi polloi. He had some status, and he actually used that as a trump card a couple of times. And so he is praying. Now, we're not told what he is praying about. Is he praying what in the world is going on? Is he praying to his God about, am I doing the right thing? Is he scared? Is it all of those things? We're not told. Only that Jesus tells Ananias, when you go to find this guy, you will find that he is praying. Maybe that's even a way of saying, don't be scared of this guy. He's harmless. He's praying right now. He's not trying to figure out how to get back from what happened. Now, Jesus continues that while he has been praying, he has seen a vision of you, Ananias, and you are coming to the house, you're laying hands on him, and you're going to help him receive his sight. So Ananias, all of a sudden, is going to be an instrument here of God, and it's going to help Saul to gain his sight. Now again, that means two things. He's going to see again, and he's going to see. Both of those things. Okay. But Ananias, for the first time, demurs. And he, as though if you had this voice, the source of the revelation, maybe you need some information. Do you have any idea who this Saul guy is? That he's been persecuting us like mad. This is a bad dude. This is a scary man. He has been persecuting us, and he doesn't want to do that. And the Lord says that he has chosen Saul for a new ministry. And this is one of the things I think is so fascinating. This new ministry is very different from the ministries that we are told about in the letters. Because in the letters, first of all, Paul wants to make sure that you realize he's an apostle, even though he was not one of the first chosen apostles. But secondly, he sees, the Paul of the letters sees his ministry to the ethnoi, the Gentiles, the nations. Here, the ministry is, as he tells Ananias, I have chosen Saul for a Gentile ministry, for kings, and for the people of Israel. That's a much, much broader ministry. That's hardly a specialty. I always think of, on Aurora, there's a mechanic, a car mechanic, and the sign says, we specialize in domestic and foreign automobiles. Well, that's quite the specialty, wouldn't you say? Come right on in. And so Paul's specialty is going to be Gentiles, Israel, and kings. That pretty much covers it. So and of course, later on, you will find him in the synagogues arguing with Israel. You'll see him with kings, Roman magistrates of various signs, and of course, he will find also do Gentiles. We see him famously in very, very Gentile territory and talking about, I perceive you're very religious and that sort of thing. So all of those ministries that God has elected for him, he'll do those before the book of Acts is done. Okay. And Jesus adds in this vision to Ananias that Saul will need to suffer for this ministry. So in this encounter, this is not going to be for safety or protection or individual blessing. This is going to be serious stuff, and there's going to be some suffering involved. And so it's interesting because Saul, who has been making sure that others suffer, now he is going to suffer himself because of this ministry that God has for him. Now, it's kind of interesting about this is that Saul's free will seems to have nothing to do with this. Jesus doesn't say, now, Saul, I've got a proposition for you, and maybe you might not like it. You might even think it's absurd, but here's what I would like for you to do. There's no discussion. This is a very, very sovereign Jesus doing that. And it's the same thing with the burning bush. At no time did God say, well, here's my card, and call me back if you get interested. No, this is what God's going to do, and this is what's going to Jesus do. And so in some sense, Jesus is doing the role that we saw God do in some of the Old Testament stories we did. This is not a time to say that you have any say in the matter. Now, it's kind of interesting because all of us like to think that we have, quote unquote, free will. And in some sense we do, but in other senses, by the time we're able to even think about some free will, we have been involved in a culture, we have a language, we are in families, we have all of these things that influence who we are and how we think, and whether we're rich or poor or everything between, and how much of that is sort of free will. Here's my experience, and this surprised me. Before I was an Episcopal priest, I was an ordained elder in the Free Methodist Church. Seattle Pacific is a Free Methodist institution, and the first time I ever heard of the Free Methodist Church was when I went to a tiny little school in southern Illinois, which was also a sister of Seattle Pacific. And they had a great pastor, and I was absolutely overwhelmed by an Old Testament professor. I remember the very first class I ever took to him, I said, I want to do what that man does. And in my background, I wouldn't even, if you had asked me what an Old Testament scholar was in high school, I couldn't even told you. I wouldn't even known what that meant. Anyway, I eventually became ordained. When my first wife died, after a little time, I started to date a faculty member at Seattle Pacific, and we finally decided to get married, and we were looking for a church. She was at the time, was attending University Presbyterian Church, that humongous thing. I said, no way am I going to do that. She didn't want to be Free Methodist. Okay. I happened to be lecturing at St. Margaret's at the time, and I just loved that little sanctuary. And I said to Joelle, and I said, I want you to come look at this. I think you would find this really nice for a wedding. She was 42 years old, had never been married. I could have done it with 5 people and let's go, but she wanted a big wedding thing. Anyway, I went to the rector and I said, could we get married here? And he says, yes, you could, but one of you would have to be an Episcopalian. Well, I said to Joelle, and I said, let's join up. I had already been lecturing all over the diocese, and I said, I can still do my quote unquote my ministry as a layperson. So we decided to do that. I'm gonna join the Episcopal Church, give up my, or whatever, rescind my parchments, so-called. And here's the thing that surprised me. I couldn't do it. I'm a professor, but before being a professor, I'm a preacher. And I could not get the consent of my conscience to let that go. So I went to the rector and I says, what would it take to become a priest? And I went through and it was arduous. I mean, this diocese, it was just, it would have been easier to get 3 or 4 open heart surgeries. But I did it. But I was surprised because I would have thought I had free will. I became a Free Methodist on my own choice. It wasn't my choice. At least I didn't feel like it was. I felt so compelled that even before I'm a professor, I'm a preacher of the gospel. And I still do it to this day. I completely flunked retirement. And I'm going to do this till the day I die. And I find it so fulfilling, so fulfilling. And so in a sense, is this my choice or God's choice? And my answer is yes. Yeah. In any way, Saul doesn't have any choice in this matter. Ananias has more. He demurred and said, this is a bad guy. I don't want to do this. He said, no, he's praying, and he's already seen a vision of you coming and laying hands on him. He's going to get his sight. Go get for it. Go for it. So Ananias obeys. He enters his house. There's no conversation. Lays hands on Saul and calls him Brother Saul. So Ananias already greets him as a fellow believer in Jesus. And he tells Brother Saul that Saul has ordered him to do this. Saul's sight is restored, and he is filled with the Holy Spirit. And of course, that's a big deal in the book of Acts. Because in the book of Acts, after Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit comes, all of the disciples are transformed. The disciples in the 4 Gospels, it would make you think, Jesus, you should have had a little help in selecting these guys. They didn't understand the parables. They didn't get Jesus. They fell asleep when he prayed. They betrayed him and denied knowing him. they're just a mess. And of course, all scaredy cats in the resurrection scenes. They're hiding out and everything. But after Pentecost, they are empowered. They're preaching to the crowds. They're completely transformed. And so Saul, Jesus hadn't said anything about the Holy Spirit, but Ananias, in laying on hands, Saul got his sight back and is getting baptized with the Holy Spirit, the same as regaining your spiritual insight. That seems to be the suggestion. It even gets better. Saul's sight was immediately restored. He got up and was baptized. And I love all of this is so telescoped. You know, there's no instruction. Here's what we believe about baptism. Here's the committee. Here's your spiritual guidance. Maybe a week later or a month later, you've got to. All of a sudden, he gets his insight back, gets the Holy Spirit, and he's baptized. He's had a good week, actually a pretty good day. All of this is complete, and we're all dying for details as to exactly how did this happen, who baptized him, and all of that. None of that is even mentioned. All of a sudden, we have a brand new Saul. He began to preach in the synagogues. His text was that Jesus was the Son of God. And this, of course, is the very, very thing that he was persecuting them for believing. Keep thinking of that in the trial scenes. Are you the Son of God? Are you the King of the Jews? Jesus would say cryptic things like, well, you say so. And, or he doesn't say anything and sort of implies affirmation. Well, we don't need any more witnesses. He's basically said that he's the Son of God. And all of a sudden, that's what Saul is preaching. And where is he doing this? In the synagogues, again. Now, keep in mind, and this is here behind the text, this is a historical thing. As late as the 4th century of the Common Era, there were Christian officials, some of them bishops, who were admonishing Christian groups, quit observing Jewish holidays, quit worshiping on the Sabbath. Because early on, Christians said, we're going to worship not on the Sabbath, the 7th day of the week. We're going to do it on the 1st day of the week, the very day that Jesus was resurrected. Now, we don't even think of that anymore because we invented something called a weekend. So to us, Friday starts the weekend, and Saturday and Sunday, and we all think of Sunday as the last day of the week, and we begin our weeks with Monday. But in the ancient world, and of course even in the 10 Commandments, the Sabbath day is the day before the 1st day of the week, which is Sunday. And so these bishops are saying, you have to get out of the synagogue and start living like that you're no longer Jews. Now, I actually think that was a mistake, because from the very beginning, almost from the time of the exile in the late 6th century and into the 5th and the 4th, there were many, many, many Gentiles in the Mediterranean world that were absolutely enamored with Jewish religious expression. There were a variety of Jewish religious expressions, and they liked the ethics, they liked the stories, they liked what we would call the liturgies and the Passover and that sort of thing. And many of them sort of joined up. And there's actually a technical word for this. They are, I think, God-fearers. Thank you. Yeah, and that meant people who were very, very interested in the God of Israel. Now, mostly this was a pagan world. You have all kinds of Greek gods and Roman gods. You have the whole Zoroastrian thing. So it's a very, very religious time. And little by little, the idea of only one God is catching on. Now, before long, the people who believed in one God realized that this is going to create problems because you have to deal with evil. And in the Old Testament, there is no dualism. There's no force for evil. There's no devil. There's no satanic figure. And so the idea of a diabolical world or a satanic world starts to develop when you have a really strong monotheism, because you say, well, wait a minute, there's only one God, but how do we account for this evil? Now, modern dualism, we have it absolutely right in our faces. Where do we get dualistic theology most prominently? Think of the cinema. Where do you get dualism? Star Wars. The Force. The Force has a good side and an evil side. That's sheer Zoroastrianism. And the idea is that the good and the evil will finally duke it out, and we hope that good wins. And in biblical religion, whether it's Judaism or Christianity, we have a great problem with that, because you can't make the satanic or the devil too big or too sovereign. C.S. Lewis, when he wrote his famous book, Screwtape Letters, there's no big dog devil. There are demons. And Lewis says it's because the idea of absolute evil is philosophically impossible, because you have to predicate something that is positive, and if it's absolute evil, you can't predicate something positive. And it's also because God created the world and the universe good, and in some ways there's no way for evil to be rooted in the reality. And so we always had, Christianity has a problem with the devil. Now, of course, when you get into popular theology, there are people who think that the devil is much more active in the world than God. In fact, wasn't it Hal Lindsey who wrote Satan is alive in the world, or something like that? I think so, something like that. Anyway, Christianity has yet to deal with this, because what you have to say is, if there are beings, where do these beings come from? God creates them. Well, you can't have God creating the Satan. And when I would do a quiz on Genesis 1 to 11, I would say, just tell me what the text says. 25 true, false questions. And I would always say, Satan initiated the conversation with Eve. And they would say, oh, yes. And I would always say, there's no Satan. It's the serpent. It's the Nachash. And there is a Satan in the book of Job, but that Satan is a prosecutor attorney who is in the heavenly court. This is not the evil Satan. And in any case, that's the whole idea of dualism. In any case, this debate is occurring in the synagogue. And everyone who heard Saul was amazed at this turnaround. And so the community is starting to take notice and this is very interesting. And Saul became increasingly more powerful, confounding the Jews who lived in Damascus by demonstrating that Jesus was the Messiah or the Christ. Again, the Hebrew word for Messiah, Mashiach, which means anointed, and the Greek word is Christ, which also means anointed. Okay. And again, this all happens without any instruction. Saul somehow is ready to go. It's like asking someone, "Are you going to go to seminary?" "No, I already know what I need to know." You know. And there are people, of course, who do that, and other people say, "Well, I know you think you know, but no, you don't know. You really need to go to the..." And most churches would say, you have to have some training to do this. That's not going to mean you know everything, but you have to know something, and that's just a very, very good thing, because you wouldn't want to go to a dentist who says, "Well, I can do this," or open heart surgery, but saying, "Well, I'll YouTube it and we'll try to do our best." No, you want someone. I want an intern. I don't want a pilot who made C's. Okay, so now as the story continues, a plot arises over Saul because he's now a turncoat. The Jews conspired to kill Saul, a plot that somehow became known to him. So now he realized he's in Damascus, in Syria, and he needs to get out of town. And they were watching the wall. They knew where you have to go in or out to egress or, let's see. Egress is going in? Going out, okay, all right. What do we do when we go in? Ingress, yes. There are so many wonderful words about gress. You can progress, you can regress, digress, you can aggress. Yeah. Aggress. Go for somebody, yeah. You could transgress. Probably, yeah. Well, even though they're watching the walls, his disciples, it's ambiguous whether it means is that Jesus' disciples, presumably, they were able to help Saul to escape by lowering him in a basket over the city wall. So he gets there and is able to go back to Jerusalem. Now, so back to Jerusalem, that's where he had been. That's where Stephen had been martyred. And right off the bat, Saul tries to unite with the disciples, but they're afraid of him, for good reason. Just a few days ago, you were yucking it up that Stephen was killed. Okay. They did not believe that he was a disciple. So there's a little bit, again, in this very, very telescoped story where we're just dying to know details, we say, well, we understand that. All of a sudden, your brother Saul, you're one of us. I mean, think of the situations where someone goes against what they've stood for all their lives. It would make you nervous. Okay. Barnabas, another man, he intervenes by relating to the people in Jerusalem the experience that Saul had and how he subsequently spoke, that is Saul, boldly on behalf of the Lord. So Barnabas says, well, let me tell you the story. This guy was on their way, you're right, he was trying to persecute it. He saw this light. He was knocked down, lost his sight, told the whole story, and I heard him preach, and he preached boldly, he preached without fear, he preached enthusiasm. He's one of us. So Saul continued his ministry by speaking boldly in the Lord's name. As well, and I love this, he also argued with the Hellenists. Now, what is a Hellenist? A Greek, yeah, which means Gentiles, right? And so, and we'll find this all over the place, because when Saul writes his letters to these churches that he's built up, most of them have both Greeks and Jews, and sometimes he has to tie them to be nice with each other. I mean, this was really quite incredible. I wish we had so much more information, because you're having these sort of theological somersaults. You're having these whiplash experiences. These are things that I would never have believed that I could believe. And now I believe them, and I believe them with fervor. And of course, the pushback is equal, because if you've been trained your whole life to think one way, and then you think another. When you think of conversion, we mostly have lived in America in a demographically Christian culture. It's not constitutionally Christian, but it has been demographically Christian. Now, that is increasingly not the case. We're all seeing church attendance struggling. We have Christian institutions, colleges, universities, seminaries, they're all struggling. There's a really interesting, pivotal time in this country. But most of us, when we go into our culture, we are either with Christians or with people who know about Christianity, even if they don't darken the doors and so in this situation, this is brand new. Think of the situations that happened with what we would call, from our point of view, these sects that arise, the Jehovah's Witness, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or even the Seventh-day Adventists. Now, we all have friends, or we've heard them knock on the door, and you might groan, oh no, here's the Jehovah's Witnesses. I'll try to be polite and that sort of thing, but I'm not interested. But I mean, those things, they are minorities, where if you're a Methodist or an Episcopalian or a Lutheran or a Roman Catholic, you could be more comfortable. Yet, even with the Roman Catholics, anyone remember the thing about John Kennedy? That was a, we don't think about it anymore, but back then that was a thing. It was a big deal. And so this, culturally and experientially, this was enormously traumatic for all kinds of people. And it's this telescoping, because this is what I would call theologized history. In other words, it's not just tells you what happened and what didn't happen, but it's telling you the significance of this from a very pointed theological point of view. And it's really interesting when you sort of read in between the lines what's going on here. Eventually, when believers realized Saul was in peril, they brought him down to Caesarea, and then sent him off to Tarsus. And that's where our story ends. So, it's so very interesting to me that all of this stuff about what happened to him lacks details. Wouldn't you have loved to know, was he baptized by himself? Who did it? Who organized it? How many were there? How did you know? How did you decide right off the bat that it was the Son of God? Was it because of the light? Saul's never given a chance to explain that. A few times in his letters, he refers to it, but even that's very cryptic. It's not a great detail. But it is one of the great encounters, and talk about night and day. I mean, he goes up on the way to Damascus as one person and comes back as completely different. And that's probably more radical than any other encounter that we did. Samuel, I thought I was going to be a priest. I guess I'm a prophet. But that's not quite as radical as this. Moses, after all, he was already worried about Israelites. He murdered that guy because he was beating up on an Israelite slave. So even though he had to argue with God, it was not a radical change of, he didn't become an Egyptian. He didn't give up his old faith. And of course, in the two Jacob stories, that's sort of in the context of the ancestral stories. But this one is really, really night and day. This is a true conversion. Saul has become another person. And how do you explain this to your fellow Pharisees? You're on the way to Damascus to get these people. These are people who are blaspheming. They're making claims about God that can't possibly be true. And they're saying things about us that we refuse to believe. And all of a sudden, your brother? No wonder they're plotting to kill him. No wonder he has to be dropped in a basket and lowered. No wonder that they're afraid of him. This is really, really radical stuff. Well, before I give my final reflections on this, do you have any questions or responses to this? Go ahead, Megan. Oh, you got the mic, okay.
So I just keep wondering what the local Greek community or Roman community thought of all this. Were they just like, oh, another new little cult popping up, not again?
Well, from the Roman point of view, what they wanted mostly was calm. They didn't like the idea of social upheaval. They didn't care whether or not the Jews kept their religion. What they did not want was social unrest. And basically that's it. And then probably, when the few times you have these little hints that Jesus escaped early arrest because he had a fairly popular following, and people who wanted to get him under, they were afraid of the crowd. I mean, even in our own world, we have lots and lots of protests these days, okay? And most of them are relatively peaceful. But if you have a big group of people, all as it takes is a couple of people to just sort of throw a rock or say something really nasty to an officer or something, and all of a sudden you've got a terrible groupthink. And then this happens whether you are for that cause or not, because sometimes these things just get out of control. And any government doesn't like things being out of control. And so no one's going to care because Saul says something in the synagogue. You can argue to your blue in the face because that's not going to upset anybody. But if you take it to the streets and you foment the crowds, then you're gonna attract attention that the Romans authorities will not like. There's probably a degree of historicity that, Pilate is treated relatively benignly in the Gospels. I mean, he says, what has he done? I don't get it. Do you want me to release him? And the whole Barabbas thing. And there's probably a kernel of truth to that, because the only one that could execute is Rome. But if that's what it takes to keep the peace, well, but that would be probably the government response. Pardon? I didn't hear that.
In either Greece or Rome, that would be.
Oh, yeah. But this was Roman territory. Yeah. Joyce, did you have a question?
Just a thought that the conversion, the acceptance of the community of Paul was also a kind of radical conversion. Although I was just reading, Barnabas talked to him, but I would be pretty suspicious.
Oh, yeah. Very suspicious. You could even make a case. Well, he might be a double agent. He says the right thing, and the next thing you know, we're in a group where we have the authorities, and you're in big trouble.
I'm thinking of the crucifixion. Wasn't one of the centurions that said, "Truly, this was the Son of God"?
Again, that's another Rome.
Letting Rome off the hook on that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The way you approach the text, I really like it, because you go like, look at this, and with the answers right there in the text, and here it isn't, which is kind of interesting. My take on this is that Luke is really trying to legitimate Paul and legitimate the mission to the Gentiles, and he needs to get at that right away. So I think he gets Paul his own private Pentecost experience, and I had not seen that before, so that's kind of interesting. And once that happens, Paul is pretty much free to go on that. Of course, there's Galatians also, and Galatians doesn't happen in the snap of a finger. It takes him 14 years.
Yeah, 14
or so,
years,
as you
exactly. Yeah.
said, to think about this and what he really wanted to do with it. But I think there's somewhere out there, there's a whole bunch of Saul cycles, Saul stories, Paul stories, and that, and actually Acts is not the Acts of the Apostles, it's the Acts of Peter, and then passes the torch to Paul.
You're quite right. After Pentecost, Peter has his Pentecost sermon. I mean, he just a couple of days ago, I don't know the guy. Damn it, I don't know the guy. And then all of a sudden, he's Billy Graham, sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, right after the conversion of Saul to Paul, Peter has this vision of the coming down and eating all this other food, and he says, "Oh, I guess it's okay," and which is that gives Paul the go-ahead.
And the book of Acts is very, very interesting. Again, the person who wrote the third gospel is the same one that wrote this.
Right.
And to this day, you can look at seminary curricula, and you'll see a class on Luke Acts. Yeah. But when they put the New Testament together, they did not allow Acts to follow Luke. It followed the Gospel of John. So now this is the only story of the early church, and it follows all four Gospels, not just one.
Right.
Plus, it also introduces the letters, because when you read James, you say, if you didn't have Acts, who's James? Or who's this Paul guy? Yeah. So Acts is really a pivotal book in the whole New Testament.
I agree with you that the Greek is a lot better in Luke than any of the others. I mean, that comes through in the English also.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
the person and number and those kinds of things, and it's a lot more interesting. But as far as the sources go for Acts, you know, this story is repeated twice more. You know, the conversion of Saul is repeated to the end, which makes me wonder, you know, how many sources have been brought in to construct this Acts of Peter and Paul, I'd call it.
Yeah, and it's wouldn't it be nice to know?
And we're not going to,
Yeah,
but it's,
we're not going to know that. Yeah.
there is that one section though where it slips into the travelogue where it's we did this, we
Yes,
did that,
exactly.
we did that,
Yeah.
which leads you to believe that there was some sources
Yeah.
in that.
Oh yeah, clearly. Yeah, I early on I did a little thesis in seminary about these little snippets of Jesus' own acts. They were called testimonia, and this was material that the later gospel writers used, because the gospels were written really quite a long time after Jesus said this. So these, in a oral tradition culture, eventually someone's writing stuff down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any other ones? Okay, here's my final reflections on Acts 9. This encounter was with someone who was not disposed to it. This was not a guy that was looking for God. He thought he was doing God's will by persecuting. The last thing he thought was for him, an encounter would have meant good and faithful, go get them. But he doesn't get that. Now, and the others were encountered by their God in the Old Testament stories, and for that matter, Ananias was encountered by his God, and even Barnabas, and to some degree, you can infer that. But with Saul, running into Jesus was the last thing he expected. Okay. Secondly, once again, the encounter is from God toward humanity, not the other way around. God says, I'm going to come get you. Now again, this violates everything we believe about free will. And again, I believe in free will, but I think it's much more limited than we like to think. I think most of life is contingent. Our very existence could not be more improbable. Very, very improbable. Yet, isn't existence nice? Yes. Now, this encounters involves not only a change in human action, but human belief. Paul ends up believing things that he would never have thought possible. Now, we're not told here. We have to infer from the letters, you know, that what did he do that decade and a half. He did the equivalent. He did a seminary, then he did a PhD, then he did a postdoc, and then he did a couple of internships. Now he's ready to go. I mean, he was enormously educated for the time. And you know, he was a Pharisee. Now, if you read the Gospels, you think, well, these are idiots. Well, they were not idiots. Again, in polemical literature, you're going to make them look as bad as you can. And this is why I always love when people who have radically different views engage each other, but don't talk about your grandmother's combat boots or that. There's this wonderful book by Marcus Borg and N.T. Wright. Marcus Borg is a good liberal Episcopalian, and N.T. Wright is much more sort of a very, very well educated evangelical, and they wrote a book. They are good friends. They love each other. And the book was a delight to read because they bring really, really good arguments. They're both very, very intelligent people, and that's the kind of debate we want. And you know, so Paul was enormously well educated. I mean, even at that time, even being literate, you made you a very, very small part of the community. Most people were not literate. Okay. Once again, the encounter is communal, not simply individual. It has all these implications for communities. It is for a community's benefit, not an individual's benefit. This is for the church. 5, the encounter will involve suffering, not protection or safety. Again, we think that, wow, if we encounter God, we will be protected. We'll have a shield around us. We'll be safe. But encountering God mean just exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. I had a high school girlfriend, maybe the smartest person, certainly that I knew at the time. She ended up becoming a radiologist. Radiologists make really, really good money. And she married a pathologist, so they were doing very well. And both of them were at the top of their game. She eventually became an Episcopal priest. And she and her husband went to Tanzania as Episcopal and missionaries. And they had a lifestyle that would be the envy of everyone on their block. And that was so interesting to me, not to mention the irony that both of us who came from Washington, Pennsylvania, would end up being Episcopal priests and doing what we do. But now they loved their work in Tanzania. They were there maybe 12 years or whatever. But it wasn't the lifestyle that they had made for themselves. They're back now and retired. But encountering God does not mean always cherries and cream, that sort of thing. This encounter also involved a radical change, not only in an individual, but in a community. Saul was huge in terms, I mean, this was a minority religious group. Now, only 2 religious groups survived, right? One of them, there was rabbinic Pharisaic Judaism, and the other one was those small groups who believed that Joshua ben Joseph was the Messiah. But it was a minority point of view until Saul says, the next thing you do, he's writing in Ephesus, or he's writing to Rome. And these are Gentile places. Now, you have Jews there too. But before long, the community doesn't even remember its Jewish roots, and it becomes Gentile. And because of our modern understanding of race, we've retrojected back that Gentiles are one race and Jews are another race, and both of them are always from the beginning ethnically diverse. You know, when you read about all of these ites in the Bible, these are not ethnicities. They are different kinds of, but we think of ourselves as a melting pot. The pot has always been a melting pot. My mentor at Michigan used to say, the only people who are really, really interested in race are racists. Okay. Now, this encounter also involved other people. Ananias. and even Barnabas. Now, we had it a little bit with Eli. The third time he says, oh, I know, next time it's God. Tell him, speak, for you're listening. So sometimes the encounter, even if it seems individual, is not individual, but involves others. And Ananias, he doesn't want to do this, but go. He's praying, and he's already seen in a vision that you're coming, laying on hands and getting his sight. 8, an element of the community has to be convinced that an encounter has indeed taken place. All they have to go on is the testimony of someone who previously could not be trusted. I mean, you think of, I consider myself a very skeptical person. I don't even answer my phone if you're not in my contact. I'm so paranoid about scams. If you leave me a message, I'll get back to you. If you don't leave a message, I'm not answering it. So I'm very skeptical, and I've sort of been like that my whole life. I have friends who say, Frank, you're too skeptical. Maybe so. But I mean, I can understand these guys in Jerusalem. Are you kidding me? I just saw him at Stephen's place. I don't like this. And in this encounter story, Jesus is the initiator, with the implication that there is no distinction between an encounter with YHWH or Jesus. They're one and the same. And I think that implication is clear in the book of Acts. Yeah. Because you could have easily made God the initiator, but it's Jesus. No difference. Great story. Any final reflections or questions? That's Francis Thompson, isn't it?
Who is the phrase of hound of heaven?
No, it's Francis Thompson, yeah. But the theology is pretty good there in that, yeah. God is the hound of heaven. Comes right after you. And I guess for me, my favorite part of this is when God comes after you and you don't have much choice. Spina, you might have good arguments. I'm just not interested. Next. And that's, I guess, the more I study this God that I study about in these wonderful detailed texts, I'm equally fascinated and scared by this God. Yeah, but I just wouldn't put anything past him or her. It's just pretty quite incredible. Yeah.
You think it's a desirable thing to reintroduce some fear of the Lord in a sense?
Oh,
I mean, it seems like we try to tame God a lot.
I think we domesticate the hell out of it. I think a good healthy dose of fear is not bad. Yeah, and it is fear. It's not just reverence. You get too close to God and it can be dangerous. Yeah, and those stories are, here we are. We're modern. We're sophisticated. We have it all mapped out, and the biblical stories basically say that God isn't what doesn't quite fit our imagination, and that's not a bad thing. I think again, I love in the resurrection stories. Almost everyone, they believed, many doubted. They believed, but weren't sure. And we somehow think of we're there. Hey, I got you. I got you, Lord. Like Peter, not me, but I think that we flatter ourselves so easily, or I flatter myself. You guys might be the exception. But it's been wonderful to be with you these 5 weeks. Thank you for those who have watched, and let's hope that in God's sovereignty we can make something like this happen again. God bless.
Amen.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't here at the
Oh, well, I understand you were on a call.